Welcome back to our State of Practice panel. I'm delighted to welcome members of our national, state, and provincial invasive species councils as panelists today. So our goals for this panel are to first share a couple of insights and highlights from our recent network survey, and then to have each panelist introduce themselves and share a couple of comments before then having a full discussion on invasives management in a changing climate. So I do have a couple of slides to start, and then I'll pull them off so everyone can see everyone's faces. But we adapted this survey for the Northwest from others that were released by the Northeast and Pacific Island risk networks to try and gather feedback from regional practitioners on a couple of different topics. So we wanted to identify the degree to which people are thinking about the nexus between climate change and invasives. We wanted to try and identify any emerging practices or policies that could potentially address the dual goals of reducing climate-related vulnerabilities, but also addressing the problems of invasive species, and then to see if we could identify any needs, opportunities, and limitations faced by practitioners in the region. And this effort is going to also be mimicked in the North Central region soon. So if you're in the North Central region in Montana and elsewhere, you'll probably also be getting a survey here. So you can learn more about the survey results by visiting our website, which is northwestrisk.org. But I'm just going to share a couple of highlights here. So the majority of our participants represented federal, state and provincial, and local government agencies. Most of them worked in project or program management or as on the ground operators. Essentially, they were field techs or land stewards. Most of them represented organizations that were focused on species and habitat conservation and natural resources management, which will explain some of the answers in the future that you'll see in a couple of slides here. And the majority of our respondents operate in Washington and Oregon, but we did have representation from Idaho, Montana, California, British Columbia, and then 1% from Alberta. So on average, our respondents currently spend more time addressing existing invasives than potential new invasive species. And about 49% believe that they are currently holding ground against invasives. So just to reflect back on our poll question, what we asked you all, as far as gaining ground, you said 18% feel that you're gaining ground. Our respondents were a little bit more optimistic at 26%. Holding ground are about the same, 44% to 49%, and losing ground, we had 25% of our respondents said that they felt they were losing ground. You guys came in at a whopping 38%. So that's good to know for who's on the call and why you're interested in this topic. The majority of our respondents indicated that they or their organizations are very or somewhat concerned about the effects of climate change on invasive species management efforts. And about 73% of respondents answered that they're sometimes, often, or always integrating climate change into invasive species management. With respect to the highest priorities for climate-informed invasive species management, people mostly said, from our survey, mostly said native community resilience and environmental degradation caused by invasives were their biggest concerns. Of less concern were things such as agricultural production, economic impacts, biocontrol efficacy, but particularly for things like agriculture and economics, transportation, those sectors were also very much less represented in our survey responses. So if we had a more diverse pool, we might have seen different priorities here. So we would actually like to do an update of this survey to diversify the respondent pool and see what else might change from these results. And then another question that we wanted to ask people were, what were their limitations both with and without climate change in terms of managing invasive species? So limitations that consistently affect practitioners' ability to successfully manage invasives and to integrate climate change into invasive species management include staff capacity, just the ability, time, and energy to do it, funding, and other priorities. But what becomes more important in a changing climate is the technical expertise to actually know what to do and how to handle climate change and what to potentially change with respect to invasives. And then the availability of, but also the access to information. Access to information and data becomes increasingly important for many managers who, in some cases, quite literally cannot afford the journal fees to find out what is the latest research. So trying to democratize access to information is something that is important, and perhaps Northwest Risk and the other risk networks can help to facilitate. So part of our goal for this symposium is to share some examples of how people are taking action in spite of these limitations, and to explore some opportunities for different groups. So what we would like to do is introduce our panelists, who we all had come and join us to talk as in their roles as Invasive Species Council participants, to just talk about some of these limitations and also some potential opportunities for improved collaboration. So I am going to stop screen sharing so that we can see everyone's faces and go ahead and ask folks to share some initial perspectives. So if it's okay, I'd like to start with you, Stas.
Thanks. I think sort of based on kind of the initial questions, I think we were given just sort of a general introduction in terms of the councils that we represent. So I'm with the National Invasive Species Council, in that we sort of work across the federal government with 12 departments and 4 White House offices. And that's both at a level of principals who are often sort of senior level political appointees, as well as day-to-day with more programmatic experts. And then there's a small staff, which I'm in charge of, that helps support facilitation across that work. Our work plans, we have work plans that define our sort of priority activities. Right now, we're sort of discussing sort of the climate related aspects of that. And I presume we'll get into that a little bit more detail and through the panel. And then in terms of just sort of questions in terms of where the council has sort of authority, and there are specific questions about sort of where we have species authority, all of that lies with the individual member agencies in terms of where they may be managing resources, national parks, national forests. And what the council is mainly responsible for is coordinating and communication across the agencies on issues of mutual interest. So that's just a general introduction. We'd be happy to get more into the climate related aspects as the discussion moves forward. Thanks.
Great. How about Rick?
Okay. Hi, good morning. I'm Rick Boatner. I'm the current chair of the Oregon Invasive Species Council, and my real job is I'm the Invasive Species Wildlife Integrity Supervisor for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. So give you a little bit of background on our council. It was, the Oregon Invasive Species Council was legislative mandated back in 2001. And our mission was to protect Oregon's natural resources and economy by planning and leading coordinated efforts. Also to prevent the introduction of invasive species and to eradicate, contain, or manage existing invasive species. The council itself consists of 22 members. 6 members are from various agencies around the state. We have 2 members from academia, and we have 10 members that represent private industry, stewardships, tribal, and then each region of the state. And then we also have members of the House of Representatives, the Senate, and a representative from the governor on there. And our main job is to, by our mandate, is to maintain our reporting system and encourage reporting, to forward reports to the appropriate agencies, to produce outreach and education material, conduct educational events, develop a statewide plan for invasive species, and also to do grants for education and or eradication and containment of in our invasive species in our state. As a council, we have no authority over any species in the state. Authority over the species for statewide mainly are in the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and Oregon Department of Ag Shops, with other agencies managing their own properties. So that's quickly in a nutshell, our agents, our council.
Excellent. How about Nick?
Hi, this is Nick Zerflu. I work for the Idaho State Department of Agriculture and then also facilitate the Idaho Invasive Species Council. And our council is executed through an Idaho governor's executive order. It has representation from the Idaho House and Senate and the legislature, as well as the governor's office, all the different branches of the state government and their associated departments, as well as several stakeholder groups such as Lakes Commissions, Idaho Outfitter and Guide Associations. We also have some great representation from the various tribes across the state. And then essentially anybody can join the meetings as well. They are a public meeting, and we do have some folks from the public that do join us in our conversations. We meet twice a year. And oftentimes the council is a conduit between the research arm, the regulatory arm, as well as industry, and facilitating information sharing, as well as how that is referenced in the various statutes and rules that we have that help guide management across the state for invasive species, noxious weeds, and other pests that we're concerned about. So it's great to see, almost 200 people on this call, and looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions for Idaho.
Great. How about Tom?
My name is Tom Wolf. I'm the Aquatic Invasive Species Bureau Chief through Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And I'm also co-vice chair of the Montana Invasive Species Council. The Montana Invasive Species Council is created in statute. It has 22 governor-appointed members, including state agency representatives, power companies, tribes, conservation organizations, and then also has federal partners as non-voting members. The council meets quarterly and coordinates invasive species efforts statewide, really facilitating communication and coordination between agencies so that we're all on the same page addressing issues related to invasive species, both aquatic and terrestrial. The council also helps address invasive species gaps and needs throughout the state. So a good example is feral hogs in the state. Our Department of Livestock lacked capacity to really help address this issue of these feral hogs coming in from Canada. So the council was able to really help promote that outreach and education on that issue, working in close coordination with state agencies and the federal agencies. Montana Invasive Species Council also in statute has the ability to create science advisory panels. So this has been a really useful tool to help address gaps and needs in invasive species issues in the state, bringing together scientists and experts on a certain topic to help address specific issues, and issues that the council has addressed to date include environmental DNA for the early detection of invasive mussels, biocontrol for hound's tongue, and evaluating the eastern heath snail, which is a snail species, a terrestrial snail species in the state that we're concerned has significant threats to agriculture. The next upcoming science advisory panel will include tree pests and fire through the movement of tree pests through firewood. So a great tool that the Invasive Species Council uses to help address gaps and needs. Thank you.
Great. How about Justin? You're muted. All right, maybe we'll do Martina.
Sure. Good morning. Martina Beck. I'm with the BC Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, and I'm also the vice chair of the Interministry Invasive Species Working Group. And this working group brings together provincial ministries, agencies, crown corporations with invasive species prevention and management interests and responsibilities to collaboratively address invasive species through a cross-government approach. So the Interministry Invasive Species Working Group's mandate includes invasive plant and animal species. This group provides policy direction and recommendations to senior levels of government through coordinated coordination amongst member agencies and collaborative delivery of invasive species programs and projects, as well as providing provincial leadership on early detection and rapid response of new invasive species incursions. Program delivery is accomplished in a variety of ways, from staff and contractors to partnerships with Indigenous nations, local and federal governments, as well as the Invasive Species Council of BC and regional invasive species organizations, as well as various stakeholder groups such as Ducks Unlimited Canada, the Nature Trust, as well as working closely, of course, with neighboring jurisdictions in both the US and Canada and other international partners. The working group has produced several strategic level documents that were approved by Assistant Deputy Ministers. These are the BC Government Invasive Species Strategic Plan, our Invasive Species Early Detection Rapid Response Plan, as well as our Zebra Quagga Mussel Early Detection Rapid Response Plan, and can certainly share the links to those documents that are available on our website. And in terms of sort of regulations and authorities, these do fall under a number of provincial acts and regulations, which I won't go into right now, but I will mention that marine invasive species does fall with the Federal Fisheries and Oceans Canada, so that they are the lead for marine invasive species. And I'll leave it at that.
Great, thanks, Martina. While Justin calls in, I'm going to go ahead and start to share my screen because we do have a couple of questions that we discussed walking through as a group. And one of them is just around defining invasive species and the different definitions that exist between federal definitions. Obviously, we have US representation, we have Canadian representation. We were meant to have a tribal member participate. She unfortunately had a personal issue, so she was not able to attend. But hopefully Justin will call in and be able to share his introduction as well.
Super. Well, happy to be joining you by phone today. My name is Justin Bush, and I'm the Executive Coordinator of the Washington Invasive Species Council. This has been a really great event. And for me, it's got me thinking that invasive species and climate change are very similar in that the root issues are humans and human activities. And as such, to solve both of these challenges, it's going to require all of us working together across jurisdictions. So really, I'm happy to be a part of this conversation today. The Invasive Species Council of the state of Washington was established by our state legislature in 2006, and it's tasked with policy level direction, planning, and coordination to both prevent and stop invasive species statewide. Much like the state of Oregon, I'm learning, the council has 22 members representing tribal, local, state, and federal government agencies, including industry, academic institutions, and conservation partners. And importantly, the council exists to guide all organizations within the state of Washington that are working to prevent and stop invasive species. We address all types, whether terrestrial or aquatic plants, animals, insects, pathogens, or diseases. We consider both domestic as well as international issues due to Washington's unique location and flourishing international trade. And we focus both on prevention as well as management as they relate to leadership and coordination, prevention, and other types of management. And importantly, each organization has its own specific mission, but invasive species councils unite all, looks at that bigger picture, and then fills gaps that can't be filled by one individual organization. And with that, passing it back.
All right, thanks for being adaptable, Justin. So like I was saying, there are these two core definitions that kind of are overarching for Canada and for the US. So to our panelists, just reflecting on these definitions, can you share a little bit more about how your individual invasive species council or invasive species working group defines invasives and how you talk about invasives?
I can take the first stab at that if you want. Once again, Nick Zerflu here from Idaho. Of course, as the council, we will be a conduit between many different agencies working on many different species. But as a department, And this is the way other departments operate as well across the state. Is a lot of folks are interested in one specific list, how that's regulated in statute or rule. And so that's essentially what we have regulatory authority over. So we have a definition in statute and rule, and then therefore a list of species broken into different taxonomic groups that you'll find in the statute and rule. So as far as how Idaho operates underneath that regulatory authority, it would be for those specific species that are listed in the rule.
I'll take it if you can still hear me.
Yes, can hear you.
Great. Well, very similar, building upon what Nick said, within the state of Washington, invasive species are legally defined as non-native organisms that cause economic or environmental harm, and they're capable to spreading to new areas of the state. And this doesn't include domestic livestock, intentionally planted agronomic crops, or non-harmful exotic organisms. And much like what we've already heard, the council is not a regulatory agency, although it is consulted by many when they're developing their regulatory priorities. And whether something is or isn't legally classified an invasive species really isn't the purview of the council. We would also refer to the classification set by state or federal regulatory agencies.
Thanks, Martina. I can go next. So within British Columbia, the Interministry Invasive Species Working Group, our definition of an invasive species is terrestrial and aquatic invasive species such as plants, animals, including fish, mollusks, crustaceans, and other invertebrates, as well as fungi and microbes that are not native to the province or outside of their natural distribution and threaten to degrade the environment or negatively impact British Columbia's people, natural environment, or economy. And building on others' comments, in BC, we do have a provincial priority list, and this includes species that are not yet present in BC, as well as where prevention is the focus, as well as early detection, rapid response species, and species that are already present in varying extents. For more established species, the priority management level may differ depending on the location and specific risks or values that species presents within an area. As I mentioned, within BC, invasive species are regulated under a number of different acts and regulations, and those authorities fall under several different ministries. So the interministry group works to bring those ministries together to work collaboratively on addressing those priority species in a coordinated way.
And for Montana, it would be similar to the other states. The authority lies with the independent agencies, and the council tries to bring them together and coordinate efforts.
And from a federal perspective, just a couple things to add. There was a subsequent executive order, the 13751, which also specifies that it's the introduction into a particular ecosystem. So it recognizes that there may even be species that are native to one part of the U.S. that are non-native or invasive in another part of the U.S. Also, I think what the definition helps us to do is to provide a unifying concept, because there are other terms in institute and within agencies that are used, such as aquatic nuisance species or noxious and exotic weeds. And so the invasive species helps provide sort of a blanket definition under which we can sort of consider the totality of those. And finally, I would just sort of note that while a lot of the discussion today is focused on the environmental impacts, we're also interested in the broader impacts to the economy, whether that's infrastructure, agriculture, public health as well. So there are a lot of dimensions in terms of the impacts where we're looking at invasive species.
For Oregon is really similar to Washington and Idaho. Our definitions is the same as Washington's, and our list is based on statute and rules within mainly Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and Oregon Department of Ag.
So as we're talking about invasives, we have these definitions now, but with climate change, that's going to force, range shifts. And species moving into new areas. What is an invasive species in light of climate change is a question our advisory team asks every month, and we don't necessarily come up with an answer every month. We just keep asking it. So I'm curious, what is it that keeps you up at night about climate change? What is it that that makes you concerned about doing what it is that you do?
I guess I'm happy to lead off. Yeah, lists certainly can keep certain people up at night, but it's not me, thankfully. So the invasive species that keeps me up at night, and as it relates to climate change, and this was referenced in some of the earlier talks, or with climate change, numerous new ports are opening internationally. There's new trade routes and commodities are being moved in new ways. And as an invasive species community, we've dedicated some effort to horizon scanning, looking at things that may be headed toward the Pacific Northwest. But I worry that we're not looking far enough out on the horizon. And I think that we should be looking at some of these new ports, new trade routes. I would love to see the research community try to engage to determine what species might be at risk from those new areas. Ultimately, with climate change, I see it as a call to action to be more preventative and to place more emphasis on early detection, rapid response.
Okay, I'll go next. No, I'm like with Justin, climate change really doesn't keep me up at night. What keeps me up at night is the possibility of an invasive like quagga mussels getting introduced and established in our neighboring state like Washington or Idaho. And how do I protect my state? That keeps me up at night often, especially our northern boundary with Washington. That gives me nightmares, how we'll do that.
Fair, yeah, I guess either way, what keeps you up at night about invasives in the future or climate change more specifically?
For me, it's, you look south, we work really closely with the University of Florida on a number of different issues, and you look at all the species they have to deal with. And climate change just opens the door for a wave of species we've never had to deal with before. And that will continue to broaden in the scope of the species that are coming that can survive in a state like Montana will increase significantly. So it's just dealing with that wave that's coming with climate change.
Yeah, and totally agree with the previous comments on this, and you know, looking elsewhere to see what may be coming in. One unique thing that is in Idaho as well as other states is the influence of geothermal waters and where we see species expansion and maybe some adaptation very locally. You know, we've got some species in the state of Idaho that a lot of folks say, you know, shouldn't be here, and just due to our geothermal and maybe some expansion into different areas, it's definitely real. One thing I wanted to touch on just regulatory wise, because I live mostly in that world, is the ability to list certain species as we become aware of. Typically, as we go through regulatory process and rulemaking, you know, you go in front of the legislature and there could be a lag time between when we hear about species and when they're officially listed. And one ability we have in Idaho is to temporarily list things in between that gap time. Typically, we like to know about species and have aware of certain impacts to industry and have that request come from the outside industry coming in. But that is one ability. And then with that is also the ability to use certain deficiency warrants, deficiency funds to be able to have quick turnaround on regulatory action and funding for that. So as far as things keeping me up at night, I mean, I've got a couple of kids that may fall into that category, but and I agree with Rick's comment on mussel introduction, but we need to keep our eyes out there and become aware of things through EDRR and quick response.
And I would, of course, echo comments made already, really around, you know, emerging species and associated pathways. And I think we all know that invasive species are a very dynamic and, you know, challenging and difficult to predict. And when you look at climate change and how that may potentially impact what new and emerging species might be coming forward. So trying to better understand that. And I think we've already seen some great discussion and examples of that this morning. So just building from that and echoing what others have said.
And how would you all answer the question about how successful you feel you are, or some of you without regulatory authority, your related agencies, how we're doing in terms of managing invasives, in terms of holding ground, gaining ground, or losing ground? Could you all reflect on that as well?
I can go first, and I might also just chime in on the last question. I think in the poll I put sort of holding ground, but somebody in the chat noted that there's some areas where we're making progress and there are other areas where we aren't. So at the end of the day, does that balance out in terms of impacts? I'm not quite sure, but it doesn't mean that I'm a complete pessimist or a complete optimist. I think we are definitely making progress, and the key question is how to leverage that. In terms of sort of the larger concern that I have with regards to invasive species, the problem, quote unquote, of invasive species and climate change is really sort of decision paralysis. I mean, obviously, it's not a discrete one-dimensional problem. We've heard the initial speakers talking about range shifts, disturbance, whether that's wildfire or extreme weather events. You got pathways of introduction, the efficacy of control measures. And so, these decisions can't be made in isolation. They're going to be context dependent. Answers won't be one size fits all. So, how do we make those hard decisions? And while it was a little bit flippant, I think it was Chris Harley's question of, do we want Seattle to look like San Diego or Taiwan, or maybe to look a little bit like Seattle traditionally has? And I think that's sort of a key question in terms of what are we managing for? And so putting all that together raises sort of very big management questions. And my hope is that at the end of the day, we actually have answers so that we have focus in terms of the responses that we're doing on the ground.
I guess I'll be happy to weigh in if we've got a little more time. Yeah, I appreciate Sauce answering that, because I was curious to know what the national perspective would be. And I think the answer depends much on the scale that we're looking at and the specific issue you're looking at. Ultimately, the fight is from one river mile to the next, one place of property to the other with invasive species. And it depends where you're looking at that scalarly, if we're being effective or not. And I think oftentimes it has to do with resources as well. If we have adequately staffed programs and we have techniques available to do management, oftentimes we can actually eradicate things. It's not the dirty E word. It's done. It's done by a lot of organizations frequently. But a lot of times programs simply don't have the resources they need to do that. And I think that this conversation is great because we need better partnerships with researchers. We need better tools to be effective. And regardless of climate change, I'm glad that we're having this dialogue.
And I'm happy to jump into, I think with regards to, holding ground, and I think the point that Justin just made, scale is really important, as well as, looking at species. And I think we can underscore the importance of transboundary collaboration, because so much of, what we're dealing with is so interconnected. And I think we've seen a lot of examples. I think, the level of participation we're seeing today, which is really great, as well as, a lot of the transboundary coordination and collaboration, where I think so far we've seen some great success in working together through things like, zebra and quagga mussel prevention across the Pacific Northwest, and those programs working collaboratively together. And I think, looking at how, climate change may impact things moving forward, I think, looking at it from that same perspective in terms of that, collaborative approach across both management and research, and sharing the information, which I think today's and tomorrow's, discussions are a great part of that.
Any other comments from Tom or Nick?
Yeah, I'd totally agree. I think success can be measured on a lot of different scales and different species dependent. I think as far as how we're doing, we can kind of pat ourselves on the back on, prevention efforts for certain species, especially, Martina mentioned quagga zebra mussels, movement on watercraft, for example. We can also kind of pat ourselves on the back for EDR species for certain things like Japanese beetle in the Boise Valley or hyacinth down in the Twin Falls area, and then to a certain extent, we can pat ourselves on the back for containment. So even though there may be a lot of species presence on the landscape, just trying to keep widespread from happening to certain drainages. For example, you may see a lot of spotted knapweed in Idaho, but some drainages, that's a very EDRR species for them, and they're doing really hard work trying to keep things out or controlling them the best they can. So it's really landscape scale, species scale. I would like to hone in on one thing that Mark Sisma mentioned in the comments, and that's as we look at listing species versus vector and honing in on vector versus specific species. That is huge, obviously, invasive species work. And I believe a lot of us do hone in on species specifically, where we should be looking at vectors and how things move around. So just to kind of open that up a little bit, or I know we're probably moving on to something else, but totally agree, Mark. I think we should be looking at that.
And I'll just close the loop on all that. I agree with all my colleagues there. That covers all the ground. But the one thing that wasn't mentioned too is just being able to communicate to the public on our successes, and that the fact that if you do have an invasive show up at a new location, it's just a new location. It's a new beachhead. It's a new opportunity for prevention in other locations. Just because you have one species invade, it doesn't mean that it's a lost cause. And so communicating that where our success, better communicating our successes and framing what we're doing to the public so they understand how we address these things. And if one makes it through the net, it's not the end of the game. We're still fighting.
Can you all reflect how you currently think about or integrate climate change or even extreme events, wildfire, drought, et cetera, into your work on the councils, either individually or if you do work collectively, like Martina mentioned, the Transboundary collaboration or across the councils? That would be great to hear a little more about.
Yeah, I'd be happy to start. So going back several years, we partnered with the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force and did kind of sort of an initial scoping exercise. This was back in 2014 of the issues that we saw coming up on the horizon with regards to climate change and invasive species. Right now, we're in the process of developing our FY22 annual work plan. And certainly this is going to be a central part of that. We're looking at sort of a couple of areas. One, wild and fire, that was already discussed. So intersection of invasive species and wild and fire and some of the climate aspects of that. Second, disaster preparedness and response. So particularly focusing on extreme weather events. And then more generally, sort of the broad concept of resilience. And there's a lot of other initiatives coming out of the new administration, the Biden administration, focused on climate change, which have the potential to bring a lot of agency focus and potentially resources. So a key question there is, where are the intersections with invasive species and how can we use those to leverage the work that we're doing? And I think finally, sort of a key question for us moving ahead is recognizing the value in these regional risk networks. How do we make the connections between sort of the federal and the regional level? And so that we're sort of advancing on all fronts.
I'm happy to jump in. So our interministry invasive species working group, the strategic plan, which was first published back in 2015, did recognize the need to explore linkages between climate change and invasive species. And more recently, the province did release a climate preparedness and adaptation strategy that recognizes the increasing threats of invasive species in relation to climate change. And as resources allow, we are developing and field verifying and implementing predictive modeling for high-risk priority invasive species introductions and expansion under climate change scenarios. So looking to try to build in that improved modeling and data analysis into our provincial invasive species occurrences and management information, so that we can be bringing climate change to help improve planning and delivery of both prevention actions as well as detection, monitoring, and on the ground containment and controls. So trying to build on existing risk assessments and integration of climate change into those risk assessments and predictive modeling.
Yes, so I'll go next. The Washington Invasive Species Council has been considering climate change for several years. Most recently, we spent a year developing our 2020 to 2025 council strategy. And when we were doing this, we grappled with climate change, and we discussed whether we should have a standalone area with action specific to climate change. And we reached out to a lot of different partners, both internal to Washington and outside. And what we heard by and large from the climate change community is that we need to integrate climate change throughout our entire strategy. It shouldn't be its own separate area. And so that has been our approach. And ultimately, we need to be thinking about climate change when it comes to any invasive species issue, whether it's a new pathway, a new problem species, planning and doing budgeting. We need to be thinking upstream. And when we think about the future, we need to be considering climate change. So we are trying to integrate it in everything what we do. What we don't know is exactly how to do that. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to be a part of this group.
I'll jump in next. Yeah, the council, we do consider, like Washington, climate change. But Oregon, a lot of the agencies like Department of Fish and Wildlife had the Oregon Conservation Strategy, which climate change and invasive species are both key elements of that plan. So there are various goals to be met based on the plan. And that also goes into the council. We use that sometimes too.
How about Montana and Idaho?
Similar in Montana, just looking at everything through a climate change lens is how we try to approach things through the council.
Yeah, likewise here in Idaho, and then I would just again reference, abilities to temporary list things if they come on the horizon and be able to adjust as needed. We don't necessarily have a catch-all authority for anything not native is automatically listed. However, there is ability to identify certain species and temporary list things. It is discussed in the Invasive Species Council.
So we've already touched on a couple of different items that things that would be helpful for the council to learn more from, whether that's from research or from other managers on the ground. So are there any this is your opportunity to kind of pitch, it's your Shark Tank. What do you want people to give you research wise or on the ground experimentation wise or examples of that would support your efforts to better address the nexus between climate change and invasives?
I'd like to see more research done on how we get rid of these things without dealing with other species. So very species specific, because we can try prevention and stuff, but we still need the tools once they get here to deal with them.
And I think
all
maybe
of us would agree that. Go ahead, Martina.
I was just going to actually build on one of your previous points, Justin, just in terms of, I think, the resources to, be proactive in terms of doing, more predictive modeling to understand, species occurrences and potential future, changes in occurrences and looking to find the resources to be more kind of proactive in those kind of preventative tools, because I think the more that we can start doing some of this modeling now will help us better understand how adaptations may need to be made in the future. So, I think as we can be, as proactive as possible and, working collaboratively across the research community to try and take these steps to better understand that, I think would be beneficial.
We were going to say the same thing in a slightly different way. Yeah, I think we all would agree that what we really need is advocates for invasive species programs and to engage decision makers is in economic and environmental studies. They're some of our most important tools that we can use to help you do work on the ground. And we've got studies such as the recent Asian giant hornet habitat suitability model paper that showed one county in Idaho and one in Montana that's the suitable habitat. Those types of things are really great. We've got a study showing the potential economic impact of dracaena mussels being introduced to the Columbia River Basin. Those kinds of things help us build programs. And I think that what I would like to see is the research community to rally around that concept and make sure that we're including climate change in that. Thinking about a potential habitat suitability paper, if we're looking at current conditions that identify 2 counties in Idaho and Montana, if we looked at climate modeling with that, it could show that there's a much greater potential range. I don't know, but that's certainly something that I would like to know.
Kind of building off that, Justin, is and something that on my wish list would be linking that comment to industry specifically. So say for the Kwagazira mussel study is linking that specifically to irrigators or municipal water or hydroelectric, and having those key players in industry becoming involved in those conversations, linking research to industry, and then having that feedback to the councils. That's huge to have that dialogue and have people become aware, as I think oftentimes, and I know I'm guilty of this, is I will work in one specific silo and I'll hang out in there. And so these conversations are good where we can open it up. Councils are great for that dialogue, but just to continue that open conversation.
I could just sort of 2 more items on the pile. I think first, one of the questions I have is the efficacy of our current control measures under sort of changing climatic variables. So whether it's biocontrol or traditional pesticides, will they have the same effectiveness, moving forward under certain scenarios or not? And if not, what other methods or techniques need to be developed or can be used in those circumstances? And then more generally, there is a lot of work going on. And I think a key question is just how do we make sure that we're informed of the different types of decision support tools and the different experiences that is happening on both sort of regional and local level that we can sort of share and hopefully others can gain from that information.
And just to add to that, the ability to communicate to the public these risks and changes over time, better ways to deliver our message so that people understand, the public understands, and politicians understand what we're doing and why it's important. And those economic studies really help drive those messages home.
Nicole, who is Nicole DeCrapia is the lead of the Northwest CASC, and she is one of the funders of this initiative, and she's a research funder, has a question for you all. So she wants to try and make sure that she's directing resources to where they're going to have the greatest impact. So she says, I hear from all of you that we need species-specific research as well as multi-species frameworks. So is there a middle ground or sweet spot there?
I think we would all say that we always, well, as invasive species councils, we might talk about a specific species or problem, but oftentimes we are forced to think about pathways because that's really our most effective approach. Rather than addressing one specific target, if we can create policies and programs to address a whole suite of things through those same activities, we're all better off. And I think along the themes of integrating research, I think we also need to think about integrating recreation as well as is trade, like I already mentioned. And one thing that I've been thinking about as we were talking about this panel is, if we have climate change in the Pacific Northwest, will boating season be longer? Will more people be visiting the Northwest because our climate will be great for recreation? And does that mean, when we factor in invasive species to that, does that mean that we need to be taking our current watercraft inspection program, for example, and amplifying it 3 times in the next 20 years? I think that's kind of my takeaway anyway, is that not only do we need to be thinking about climate change and invasive species, but also all sorts of other things.
Yeah, and just following up on that pathway comment, when we talk about horizon scanning and identifying new species, tying those back to pathways, a lot of those pathways are currently being addressed. If there's a new species that comes up that's a threat, maybe just tinkering how we deal with that pathway, we get a lot more bang for our buck, going that direction. And getting the research to support that, those decisions would be helpful.
I'll agree with Tom and Justin that prevention's the key, so they don't get here in the first place. But I also think the Northwest has so many different ecoregions, and so there's so different with species, that more species specific than a multi, because what works in Texas, we may not be able to use here in Oregon. I mean, we need something that we can use everywhere, not just, back east, or, in eastern Montana can be used there, but they can't use it in western Montana. So I go more specific.
So Tom, you've brought up a couple of times now about communicating with the public, which I really appreciate too. That came up quite a bit in our survey. Do you think that there's an opportunity to leverage climate change as a new way to message, or vice versa, invasives as a new way to message to the public about the importance of these two issues and then where they intersect?
Yes, climate change is complicated, but I think the concept is pretty well understood by the public. Whether people believe in it or not, I guess is not part of what we have to talk about. But the idea of warming climates creating the habitat for more species that will create more problems, and messaging that in a way is something I think people can understand. Is that, people see what's going on around them. They see the hottest summer on record here in Montana. And I think adding to that, the idea that more weed species can survive and thrive here, and more aquatic invasives and more forest pests, using that climate change as a way to help deliver that message so that people better understand we have more things coming, and hopefully, as a result, continue to support and expand their support for our efforts. That would be a worthy cause.
Anyone else have comments on public education or how to better leverage our messaging tools?
Yeah, I'll just add that, back to my sort of initial comments, I think that a lot of it goes back to communicating the public and understanding what are the values or assets that they're interested in protecting. And if that's sort of one of the lenses that we're looking at this, we can relate it to climate change, we can relate it to invasive species, we can relate it to other drivers of change. So I think, what we're finding as we move on is more and more of these things are interconnected and intersecting. And so you pull one thread and it sort of pulls on a lot of the others. And I think really sort of going back to understanding what is it that the public is interested in their parks or whatever it might be, and then tying that back to climate invasives.
Yeah, and I think kind of building from that point, connecting that addressing and preventing invasive species, ties into building, native species and ecosystem resiliency to climate change. So by addressing invasive species, you're helping to, strengthen our native ecosystems to be able to help try to, look at extreme events and how our native ecosystems are responding to those extreme events as a result of climate change, and and how invasive species and addressing them is part of that bigger picture.
So one other thing that a couple of you have mentioned too is about ways to coordinate better across the region, across the nation. Do you have any comments there about opportunities, tools, resources that would support that? How the risk networks could support this kind of effort? Not just Northwest, but Tony Lynn's on the call too. She runs the Northeast risk. There's opportunities where we could potentially help the councils as well.
I think that would be useful for sure. You know, as we talk about this at different scales, coordinating the coordination becomes a challenge. And, you know, we all want to be singing from the same songbook. And so I think this national dialogue between the different risks, having the regional dialogue, and then having a dialogue internally, and even I'm hopeful that there would be like local dialogue happening at the same time, creating some process to share information at all those scales is really valuable, because I think ultimately, getting back to the last point, I think ultimately all of our communities wherever we live see climate change as an issue and see invasive species as an issue, but they may not know how to meaningfully play a role in addressing it. And so I think that would be our question is, I think this group probably should talk about what our messages are and what simple things the public can do to help. And you know, if we can get that message out and communicate the same thing, then certainly we'll be effective together.
Yeah, I would definitely echo Justin's comment. I mean, I think we've had a lot of great examples of other, you know, shared messaging that, you know, we've been able to deliver in coordination. And I think, you know, looking at this, no different in terms of how we can build some shared messaging to bring in that, you know, direct connection between invasive species and climate change, and how we can share those common threads, and definitely echo, you know, bringing it down to individual, you know, connection points with our local, you know, communities and places that we, you know, live, and how we see this and what our direct contributions can be. So I think that's building on strengths of how we've been successful in messaging in other areas, and build from that.
Excellent. Well, we have about 1 minute left. Are there any other final comments that any of our panelists want to share?
More or less a question to the group is if there is currently a campaign message that links the two, being climate change and invasive species. If not, there's a plug out there. Go find one and see what kind of traction you get. Clean, drain, dry, but you're gonna need to adapt that a little bit to climate change. I can see some wheel spinning.
Stas, do you know if there's been any efforts like that?
Not on the communication front, but just kind of to echo your comments, Justin, on sort of the, you know, the importance of looking at different scales. I would note that I think the regional or the eco-regional scale is a sweet spot in that, in terms of being able to connect work going on with the different states, and then sort of from a federal perspective, being able to look at what's going on in different regions. So I'm very supportive of the risk concept. And again, you know, as we go forward from the federal perspective, obviously we've got, you know, the federal agencies have park units and other folks working at the regional and the state level along with your agencies. And I think sort of a key question is, again, sort of how do we sort of expand and build upon this concept? So I'm looking forward to sort of the future and figuring out how we can engage in future collaboration.
So I'm just going to make a quick.
Thinking about that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, while everyone's thinking about the message, just I think the takeaway here is that we all have a call to be more preventative and to focus more on early detection, rapid response. We can't see what the future looks like, but certainly we know the more preventative we are and the faster we take action, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, as moderator and facilitator, I'm just going to use executive decision here to just ask for 2 more minutes for this session, because we had an important question come in that reflects on some comments you all made about this not just being an environmental issue, but also about people in terms of economy and social. So Yvonne asks, there's a gap among the science conducted in research institutions, funders, and managers. The lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion in all areas related to invasive species research and management is one of the big barriers to move forward to an integrative view of these issues. So he's wondering about how inclusive are the decisions about directing resources to manage invasive species in your region are. So if we could take just 2 more minutes and just reflect on that, that would be great.
I'll jump in first. The Invasive Species Council in Washington has been grappling with this for a while, and ultimately we're trying to adapt our prioritization scheme, trying to ask new questions. Historically, we've asked questions about impact to agriculture, the geographic range of a species, and I think we need to be thinking more about species that have cultural importance, species that have non-traditional impacts, such as impacts on food sources, et cetera. And so I don't have a perfect answer. I think that's something that this group should discuss further. But I think that we all probably can agree that we need to do more and are trying to wrap our minds around what that looks like.
Yeah, and I would totally agree. And I think this falls into that category of we just need to keep the conversation going, discussion going. Again, linking the research arm with industry and having those impacts be very real, and especially when it's linking to their pocketbook. This falls into we just need to continue the conversation. I don't have a perfect answer for it either.
Well, thank you for taking the time, everyone. We really appreciate. Thank you so much to our panelists. We can follow up on some of these additional questions that came in while we were talking offline, or perhaps later in the day.